So is anybody doing any self-inquiry the last couple days or week, Alan? Yeah.
Well, he was saying self-inquiry is done by the impersonal, not by the me.
Yes. Yes.
So as soon as self-inquiry starts, it's the impersonal process that's happening. I mean, it's always happening, but it's, well, I don't know what to say.
Well, self-inquiry, that's a good point. So self-inquiry, when it's questioning the individual.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's, if we go back to the first session, there's the mind, or whatever you want to call it, and it goes off, it gets distracted, and it comes back. So we know there's three things: the mind gets distracted, comes back.
Mm-hmm.
This mind is not going to ask itself, who is it that's going back and forth?
Mm-hmm.
That's when the sense of personal doership has an overlay and thinks that when I start to question myself, it's me again. And that what that's doing is giving power where it doesn't belong. The me is powerless, and it cannot. The me is powerless, and it thinks that it's asking the question, but it's not. So it's important to know that there's this impersonal quality that is asking this question. So it's kind of a, it's to think that the me is asking that self-inquiry is giving it undue power. So that's where I'm making this difference.
Could you give examples of me asking the question and the impersonal question arising?
Yeah, so me asking the question is, this is actually, I was going to talk about this. So you have, and this is actually, so remember, when you are inquiring about something, it's about a topic, okay? So there's a content around which you are asking questions about. And in this book that we're studying, there's 21 chapters. And I didn't look to see through the chapters to see if there is anything on hope. But I thought about, when I was seeking, I thought about hope a lot. So let's talk about hope, and hopefully this will answer your question. So okay. If I say, I hope that, I get enlightened. I have a hope that I will get enlightened. Then that is coming from an individual that thinks that they're going to be enlightened. So what's involved there? There's misunderstanding. So one of the differences between the self-inquiry and a question coming from a me is that there's going to always be misunderstanding. So I feel like I'm going to get enlightened. How can I get enlightened? What can I do to get enlightened? If I do this, how can I do this practice more so I can get enlightened? Do you get the flavor? What can I stop doing in order to get enlightened? It's all coming from the me. But as soon as you ask, who is it that wants to get enlightened? Then what's subtly implied, whether it's known or not, is that there's not going to be someone to get enlightened. And if there's not going to be someone to get enlightened, that's automatically makes it impersonal. So if I start to question, well, who wants it to get enlightened? And I've heard that there's no enlightened beings, then who is it or what is it that wants to get enlightened? That implies that there's nothing for me. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So that makes it impersonal. Now let's see about, now just insert hope. I hope that I get enlightened. Well, who is it that wants to have this hope? And then you start saying, well, this hope, because this is the content that we're talking about. You take the topic, hope, and you start asking questions about it. And so you say, well, who is it that has this hope?
Mm-hmm.
And you go, oh, well, it's the me that has this hope, because we know, in step 2, we draw information. We have to have information. Information is there's no enlightened beings. It's never been an enlightened being. So we say, okay, I'm pulling in that information, and I come up with this idea that a better understanding that that I can't hope to be enlightened. It's the me that hopes.
Mm-hmm.
And you say, okay, then what happens to hope at that stage? There's no, that if that means hope doesn't belong to this impersonal sense, it only belongs to the me, then what does hope have what role does hope now play at the impersonal level? That's the next question. Does that make sense? Are you following the line of thought so far?
Yes.
So first you have this idea of hope, and then you realize that how hope plays out when the difference from the me asking the question. I hope I get enlightened. What can I do to get enlightened? What can I not do to get enlightened? How can I improve me to get enlightened? Then you realize when you ask to do self-inquiry, well, who wants to get enlightened? Then you're saying, wow, then this is, I'm already making it impersonal, because the me that wants to get enlightened. Now, then you say, well, can hope still function or be a concept at the impersonal level? So this is where you
unlikely.
That's
unlikely.
Well, there's an intermediate stage. If you go back and if you look at some concepts that have been out there, and the concepts are, if you look at 2 things I can think of, is Wayne's poem to Ramesh in the early stages, when he says, who would have thought I would have fallen in love with the bespectacled banker from Bombay? And at the end, he goes, and secretly hopes that this me will get close and emulate, disappear. So, and then there's a poem in No Way where it talks about, how hope keeps someone binding.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens, and this happened to me, is that I started having this hope that this me would disappear. There's a hope that something would, some kind of power greater than myself or pure consciousness would step in and eliminate this me that hoped to get enlightened. And so it's not totally impersonal, it's not totally personal either. It's an intermediate stage where that concept of hope was turned into, well, I hope someday that this me disappears.
You're saying, Bala, that wish didn't come from the me.
Right, it didn't come from the me. It came from a deeper sense of inquiry. And I just took you through the thought process that I went through.
Seems to me that the impersonal thing would be, there isn't hope and there isn't no hope. That whole thing disappears into the present or something.
Yes, but there's no hope, because we've been accustomed and we've been conditioned that hope is always in relation to a me. So we think that's why I asked the question, well, can there be any hope outside of the me asking? And I just gave you an example.
Hmm.
But yeah, usually we think, well, if there's no me, there wouldn't be any hope, and it wouldn't be from an impersonal level. But there can still be a concept. There's always concepts floating out there that the me can grab onto, or they can be looked at in an impersonal. Now, while you're thinking about that, Mary has to get this link, so let me go on to Zoom real quickly. Okay. Any questions about that?
I do have a question, Bala.
Yes.
So you say that the self-inquiry is not coming from the me.
Yes.
The question who is hoping is not coming from the me.
Yes.
And yet it does. So from my experience, it seems like it's indistinguishable where the question is coming from.
Right. So that's an important point. That's where self-inquiry is really helpful, because it seems like it does. And what that really does is it really makes apparent this sense of personal doership. So it seems like it's so strong that it seems that it's doing it by the me when it's actually happening impersonally.
So would it be right to say that there has to be some motivation for the self-inquiry? That motivation isn't coming from the me.
No, that's the point. If it's impersonal, there is no motivation. It's coming purely from self, large self. The motivation comes from the me.
But isn't there a motivation for hope?
When it belongs to the me, but when it belongs, when it comes for the idea of, this is good because we're getting deeper. When it comes to this idea that the me wants to dissolve itself, or dissolve, I mean.
Yeah.
If there's a sense of personal doership, the me thinks, oh, it wants to dissolve itself. But what that sense of self-inquiry really does is show that it's not the me that wants to dissolve itself. It's pure consciousness that wants to get back to itself.
So that's a motivation then. Pure consciousness wants to get back to itself.
From a personal standpoint, we place on a human quality on the pure consciousness that it wants to get back to itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But from the perspective of pure consciousness, it's just happening.
Yes, it's simply happening. It's like it's like a pinball machine. You let go of the pinball, which is awareness coming out of itself, and eventually it's going to come back down. At some point, the ball is going to come back down. Hello, Mary. Welcome.
Hi, Mary.
So this is where the inquiry, that's where just by questioning what we did, we have a deeper understanding and about the how kind of baffling and cunning this sense of me can, and it just asserts itself and takes ownership where it doesn't take ownership. It just asserts itself.
Everywhere.
Everywhere, yeah.
Claims everything for itself. Basically.
Yeah. It even claims the impersonal. So that's why I'm distinguishing that self-inquiry is impersonal. Now, then we say, well, where else does that happen? This claiming, and the claiming happens when the waker wakes up. It says, I had the dream, but no, the waker didn't have the dream. The waker wasn't even born yet, wasn't even manifest yet. The dreamer had the dream. So when you say, well, it feels like I am doing the self-inquiry, it's like, yep, you're right. It does feel like it. But when I see a mirage, it feels like I'm seeing water in the desert. But there's no water in the desert. And that points out to the illusory nature of the me, which you were just seeing very clearly. You say, I'm really seeing a snake. I see a snake. And you say, yep, but there's really a rope behind that. So that's where what helps in the self-inquiry is like, okay, so now we're seeing, and the beautiful thing about self-inquiry when it's done correctly is you notice that we started up here and now we're down here where we never expected. We didn't know that we we're going to get down to this idea of claiming me when we talked about hope. Right? 10 minutes ago, we didn't know where it was going to lead. So that's another indication that self-inquiry is happening, because you don't know where it's going to end up. So the me would say, I'm going to start here and I'm going to end up here. And that's all the me is all planning it out, thinking that it has control over the self-inquiry. The self-inquiry is almost an uncontrollable process. You don't know where it's going to end up. And so, it's going back to the first session that we did this, when you start going down level, and I'm just notionally saying to sort of piggyback on Ramesh's idea of, first you have the intellectual understanding, it gets deeper and deeper until you get an intuitive level. And when you get to the intuitive level, you've hit rock bottom, you can't go anymore. At each level, a different question comes in. Because it becomes a new question or a new problem. And Einstein said something like, you can't approach a problem with the same approach as when it was formed, or something like that. I'm doing a bad paraphrasing. Are you familiar with the quote, Eileen?
No.
What is the full quote?
Oh, I don't know the full quote.
Oh, but you know what I'm talking about, yeah.
Yeah.
You could look it up. So what self-inquiry does is it illuminates something, and what it illuminates is ignorance, and it illuminates misunderstanding. And so what was illuminated in this first round of self-inquiry was this really illuminated this false sense of authorship, this sense of personal doership, and how it claims everything. And then too, it really shows how conditioned we are. Because we can't even believe that there might be hope without a me there. It's like, well, wait a minute, And so it feels like there can't be actions without a me there. There can't be concepts without a me there.
Things, but you've all frozen. No, now you're back. Did other people have it freeze for a while?
No, I didn't.
No.
Strange day. Okay.
So when you do, another thing that was helpful about self-inquiry is like, okay, we've started here in the beginning, now we're down here, and I would ask myself, do I feel complete? Do I feel complete in this understanding? Is there any other question I could ask? Is there any something that feels left undone or something like that? And that's what I would ask myself. So one thing that would come to mind as an example is I might ask, well, why does the me do that? Why does it claim everything? And then I would quickly think, okay, thinking about pieces of information, drawing in, the why question is never helpful. Why questions are never helpful. They never get you anywhere. And because the answer is, well, that's it's nature. But it's not that I got the answer, that it's its nature, but the fact that the why question is never helpful. You see the difference? So there's still something kind of incomplete, and I'd say, oh, well, why does the claiming me do that? And I think, oh, well, that's its nature, but you know what? Really, what was illuminated was that the why question is never really helpful. Because does it really help me to know that that's its nature? I mean, you say, well, just the claiming me, it's why we call it the claiming me. It claims everything, just like the heart beats. So it doesn't really, it's not so important that we got the answer, but that it illuminated the utility in asking the why questions.
Or the lack of utility.
The what?
Or the lack of utility.
Yes.
So where is that question coming from? That why question.
Where is the why question coming from?
Yeah.
I would so this is a good point. So you have a question, and you just said like the utility of asking that why question doesn't really help, right? So my question would be, why ask a question about something that has no value to it?
Right. I guess where I was coming from with that question was, if the why question has no utility, it's likely that it's not coming from pure consciousness. So therefore it would be coming from the me. But then why would the me be asking a why question about itself?
Right. But again, if it's not a useful concept about, the why question, then the next question would be, would it be useful to know where this non-useful concept comes from?
Seems like it.
In what way?
Well, it seems, to me, it seems interesting that if it were coming from the me, that the me would be asking about the why,
Mm-hmm.
about itself.
Mm-hmm. So then I would ask you then, why is it important for you to know that where it comes from? Who really wants to know that question?
The me,
Okay.
I do.
So anytime the me wants to know something, know that it will never get satisfied. So it's about not enabling the me, but starving it, so to speak. So what was illuminated is a more subtle understanding of this nature of the me. It's insatiable. It always wants to know. So then the next question would be, well, then what is this function of knowing or wanting to know in a more productive way?
Exactly what I was going to ask.
And so the answer to that is, if it helps eliminate, subtract, or dissolve the me, if it helps eliminate another concept or even dissolve the me in some certain power, or take away the power by demonstrating the powerlessness of the me, then that is a good answer. And it goes back to what I've talked about. Swami Ramatirtha said this sadhana is not to accumulate gold bullions on it and put it on a donkey's back. But because what does that do? It makes someone start to have this idea that I know. A thought comes in, manifests, this claiming me, it manifests as I know. And that's in the opposite direction of what we want. What we want is to clearly see or illuminate that there's a knowing without a me. So I know is adding gold bullion onto the donkey's back, which it's at once valuable, but it's also a burden.
How is it valuable?
What's that?
How is it valuable?
Well, because it's knowledge, it's understanding. It's like, oh, I got an understanding about the me. It's knowledge, but it's not wisdom. So it's knowledge, but it adds a burden rather than having knowledge that relieves a burden. So the knowledge itself can be valuable, if it relieves a burden, or it can be, and it's valuable. It's depends on how we use it. It can relieve a burden, or it can create a burden. So it's helpful to know when you're asking a question, it's like, why do I want to know this? What's going to be, how is this going to dissolve the, or how is this going to relieve the burden of the me, or how's it going to help dissolve the me, rather than, oh, how am I finally going to understand this? So I give the example when I was, one of the big concepts, topics that I did self-inquiry is about this sense of illusion, this idea of illusion that's in Advaita Vedanta. And on and off, I had thought about it for about 13 to 15 years. And one day I was mowing the yard with my Walkman, and Wayne was talking about the thing about the idea of illusion is that it doesn't have any independent existence. And when I heard that, I got it. I said, oh, yeah, that's the thing about an illusion. Illusion thinks that you have an independent existence, but with the illusion, it doesn't have an independent existence. The world everything's dependent on pure consciousness. And I got that. And it wasn't like, oh, I finally got it after 13, 14 years. Look what I know. I get a gold star. It's I don't have to think about the idea of illusion anymore. It wasn't in my wheelhouse of conscious thinking, either coming in and out. And so that was freedom.
But I do want to make just one distinction, which is probably pretty obvious, but I just want to say it because it's coming to me. This is separate from, say, inquiry into mathematics or any kind of academic subject, or like wanting to know,
right?
So yeah, that kind of thing.
It is. In that field, you want to accumulate knowledge. You want to grow. You want to grow your understanding. You want to add on. But in this, you don't take that approach.
Right. And so it's clearly possible. If you're an academic, it's really possible to your understanding and deepen your knowledge field without feeding the me.
I'm sorry. Say that again. There was some noise in the background.
Oh, sorry. It's clearly possible in like an academic field to expand your knowledge, your understanding without feeding the me.
I would say that's highly unlikely, because there's a person that when they're accumulating, it's I know this. And so that's why you can get very egotistical in academic field.
You as an academic, so what is it like then to
So are you referring to my experience or people in general?
Well, I guess both. I guess there must be a distinction between people in general and then someone who's enlightened.
Well, in that field, it's necessary to accumulate knowledge. The important thing is in any other field, it's important to accumulate knowledge. But in this Advaita Vedanta, in the journey of the sadhana, it's important not to accumulate knowledge.
Of any kind.
Of any kind. Yes. Yes. The only knowledge that you want to have is self-knowledge, and the self, big S, and the self knows itself by itself. It doesn't need the me, which is what we talked about 10 minutes ago.
So in other words, it would be hard to be like a professional academic doing self-inquiry.
Well, so this is where the concept of in the academic field or in the sciences, you're studying the world. And so you're using a different intellect, which is called the gross intellect. And in this study, we're using the subtle intellect. And what people tend to do is they take the gross intellect into the spiritual field, and instead of using the subtle intellect, they use the gross intellect, and when they get an answer, they say, oh, I know. So what we're talking about as a topic, we're talking about knowledge. What is knowledge? And in the terrestrial field, there is you have knowledge of something. Here, we don't have knowledge of something. Now, why is that? Because if we have knowledge of something, we make it an object. But we're studying pure subjectivity that can't be objectified. So how can we have knowledge of something that is pure subjectivity? It makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in this sadhana, if you are gaining knowledge of something, you're adding gold to the camel's back.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So last week we started chapter 2, and this is page 10, and we ended this idea about the 3 states of consciousness. And Maharishi goes, for whom is the blank? Find out. You cannot deny yourself at any time. The self is there and continues in all 3 states of consciousness. So then the questioner says, should I remain as if in sleep and be watchful at the same time? Maharishi says, yes, watchfulness is the waking state. Therefore, the state will not be one of sleep, but sleepless sleep. If you go the way of your thoughts, you'll be carried away by them, and you will find yourself in an endless maze. Questioner, so then I must go back tracing the source of thoughts. Maharishi, quite so. So this is another reason to avoid going to watching the thoughts, being mindful of thoughts, because the thoughts will always lead down some kind of road, or he's saying a maze. So what he's saying is, it's not important to inquire where does this distraction lead, nor is it even important to watch when it's concentrating, when it's focused. It's still leading down a road, or what he calls is a maze. So the questioner says, I must go back tracing the source of thoughts. Maharishi, quite so. In that way, the thoughts will disappear, and the self alone will remain. In fact, there is no inside or outside for the self. They are also projections of the ego. The self is pure and absolute. Questioner, is it understood intellectually only is not intellect a helpful realization? Maharishi, yes, up to a certain stage. Even so, realize that the self transcends the intellect. The latter must itself vanish to reach the self. So we already talked about this. So we talked about it, and then there it is. That's what he's talking about. Has to transcend the intellect.
Then the gross intellect, or both intellects?
Both. Ultimately, both. It's like the gross, if you are concerned about self-realization, the train is like going, is the gross intellect is like a train going westbound, and the subtle intellect is the train going eastbound. But eventually you're going to have to get off the train. Any questions about that?
I wanted to clarify some terminology, Bala.
Yep.
So what Ramana Maharshi calls the I thought. So he says, when you wake up in the morning, the I thought, that's the I thought manifests itself. So is it basically the sense of presence that he's referring to? It's not an ego, right?
What page are you on?
Oh, well, he keeps, wait a minute, let me be more specific.
I think he refers to it on page.
Well, for instance, page 12, paragraph 4.
Yeah.
And the last 3 lines. In deep sleep state, there is no I. The I thought arises on waking, and then the world appears. So, but this I thought, he means the wakefulness in general, right? The being, the awareness of the waking state.
So he's saying, to paraphrase it, it's when your consciousness identifies with the waking body, and then there's the I thought. So it's kind of like it's like when electricity goes into the toaster is now, you press it down, it's on, and it's hot. So in other places, he'll say, pay attention to that, to the electricity, and not so much the toaster. And you can see that when upon rising, you see like the identification happening in a split second. It's one form of inquiry.
So just to clarify, this I thought is basically the identification with the body while awake, right?
Yes.
It's different. It's different from what Mr. Kodata refers to as I am. Is it?
Yes. Yes. Because to understand this, let's use the conceptual model that Nisargadatta uses. So we need to bring out more concepts. Like the second step, you have your content. Now we use some concepts to help understand this. Remember, in this conceptual model, there is pure subjectivity that cannot be described, cannot be, there's no characteristics to it. And within that, we say there's the potential for it to step outside of itself. So stage 1, let's say, is when there's pure subjectivity. Stage 2 is when, in the pure subjectivity, awareness steps outside of itself. And awareness is aware of itself. Now, what does that mean? There's an object and there's a subject. But it's awareness aware of itself. The me has not been born yet. So that's stage 2. Stage 3 is that when that awareness infuses itself into a name and form.
And you mean not just this body, the whole world of manifest objects, like, right?
Right. But here he's talking about the body. So at stage 3, this pure subjectivity now has gone through this modification of being aware of itself, and then it infuses in name and form. Now, at that point, life is kind of good. There's simple identification. In stage 4, then the overlay of the me happens. And now it's like, this is me. I have everybody else. That creates plurality, sense of separation, which eventually down the road leads to suffering. So what he's trying to point to is stage 3.
So if you're talking about when you wake up, is that first stage awareness aware of itself? Is that a step into the waking state?
That's stage 3. And when awareness is aware of itself, it's the mystical experience.
It's what?
The mystical experience. That is at the core. When awareness is aware of itself, it's the mystical experience. And, the mystical experiences can take on numerous and various flavors of that awareness being aware of itself. For example, I am love. Love is aware of itself in the form of love. I am unity. Love, that unity in the form of seeing unity. The beloved, I'm next to my beloved, the two Krishna Radha, the two lovers. But at the core of it, there's a reflection, there's a mirror. So that's stage 2. And notice that is 2 stages before the me gets inserted over on the body mind. So the question would be to go, so let's say we want to get a little deeper on this I thought is, so what if I can't do that? Or what if I don't notice it? Well, it's kind of a win-win situation. The win-win situation is if you don't notice this presence, and it happens in a flash that I would say it almost happens inferentially. You kind of infer. Sometimes it can be experienced like, whoa. But most of the time it's inferred like, oh, I can kind of see that, and then there's identification. At least you are able, when the self-inquiry happens, upon waking, you really get to illuminate. Again, it goes down to illumination. The thoughts are illuminated. And because you're looking at the one step before the thoughts, or you're looking at what is illuminating the thoughts have, when you're doing this, when it's being done, the thoughts are seen as more impersonal or witnessing. So
is that,
go ahead.
is that stage 3 or stage 2? That's stage 3, isn't it?
Stage 3.
Yeah.
So in stage 3, you're looking for that presence. It goes by too fast, and you look at. But then, what happens through the self-inquiry is that you see these thoughts. So instead of saying I, and then you also see the me. So you say I can't do this. My mind is too busy. Well, first of all, it's not your mind. So it's not my mind. That's claiming. That's ownership. That's authorship. That's what gets illumined. It's not your mind. Well, what is it? They're thoughts. And then you say, and then there's no judgment on the thoughts. You say, you wake up. So this is what it looks like without doing self-inquiry. You wake up and you're not even aware of your thoughts, and you go about your day. You start to do inquiry, you go, well, my mind is too busy. Well, wait a minute, it's not my mind. Okay, now we're getting a little deeper. So you wake up and you're looking for the presence is missed, but you say, oh, wait a minute, there's these thoughts. And the mind is active, or there's a lot of thoughts. It's a description. It's not a judgment. Judgment is, I have so many thoughts. I missed out on the presence. I suck at self-inquiry. I'm going to have to wait another 24 hours. And that's all judgment, involvement, claiming, sense of personal doership, sense of authorship. So if upon waking you miss the presence, okay, no big deal. Then the thoughts arise and you say, oh, there's a lot of thoughts here. And the thoughts are active. Now we take a concept from the literature. What kind of concept from the literature describes the quality of thoughts?
Ripples in water.
Yes, that's kind of shows the. That's one concept. That's yeah. What else?
Clouds in the sky.
Yes, obscures the presence. But what about describing the quality? You have the three gunas.
Okay.
So upon waking, if upon waking the mind is clear, most likely the presence will be seen. If it's not seen, then most likely it's going to be because of rajas, a very active mind. And then if it's so sleepy that the whole thing is missed and it takes a while to wake up, that's tamas. So not only is the quality of mind missed in tamas, the presence is missed also. So you simply say, oh, this is sattva, this is rajas, and this is tamas upon waking. And it actually gives you an idea of what your probably day is going to look like, which can be informative. It's like, oh, presence was seen. Mind is calm. Upon waking, the mind is calm. That's a great way to start off the day. So let's go a little deeper. So sattva is a nice thing. Sattva is an enjoyable thing. We got to make sure that we're not don't get attached to sattva. But if on a good day you wake up, presence was seen, there's not as much activity in the mind, then what Shankaracharya would say in Bhaja Govindam is to cultivate that sattva by maybe doing something before work that's more meditative. That's you kind of like want to seize the day, seize the opportunity, because that may not happen as much. So that would be recognized, and you say, wait a minute, this is sattva. I'm going, and this is what I'm just going by my experience. What I did when sattva happened, I say, okay, I'm going to use this time and either meditate or think or you do self-inquiry or whatever. And if it was rajas, I'd say, whoa, wait a minute, it just woke up. It's like the mind's busy. Wait a minute, give me a chance here. You know, it's like a dog waking up and saying, "Come on, let's go." It's like, wait a minute. And then if there's a tamasic guna, is like, okay, this morning is gonna be kind of slow. I'm gonna act accordingly. Any questions about that?
But none of those three states should be viewed as good or bad, right?
Right.
Not so much good or bad, but the sattva is going to be more helpful in the spiritual path than the tamas. Tamas is not going to help at all. Rajas is helpful in overcoming tamas, but rajas is what clouds the sattva. So it depends on how the gunas are functioning, what state is what's happening in the body-mind mechanism. For example, if there's rajas and there's a lot of activity, you would want to try to calm the mind down. And if there's tamas, you would want to get kicked into activity. And if there's sattva, you would want to hold that, maintain it, sustain it as much as possible, as long as possible. Now, this is kind of like how self-inquiry would express itself in daily living in a very practical way.
Mm.
So again, you can't say that I'm going to make sure that sattva, I want to create sattva and make sure it lasts through as long as possible. As soon as that happens, that's the sense of personal doership, which is rajasic. The sattvic is held, so to speak. It's witnessed, and that's why I say it's simply taken advantage of as much as possible until that ride is over. So if you say, oh my God, that's sattva, I got to do something, that's kill it. That's rajas. Like, okay, this is sattva, this is great. I don't have any control over this. I'm going to use it now as much as possible. Thank you, Krishna, whatever.
So the I thought rising, would that be equivalent to the witness state prior to?
The I thought arising is consciousness infusing into the body and the seeing it as consciousness being infused in the body is witnessing. Now, what is witnessing is seeing that. The only time that can be seen is when there's witnessing. Because if there's a me can't see that. Why not? Why can't the me see it? Because that means if you go back to our fourth stage, the fourth stage has already been manifested and the third stage no longer exists. So the fourth stage can't go back and see the third stage. The me can't go back and see the third stage. It can't go back and see the second stage, and it can't go back and see the pure subjectivity. But yet, we say that pure subjectivity, in a way, it permeates everything. Just like a tree is like the fourth stage, full-grown tree. But at one time, it was a seed. Now, prior to the tree is a seed. But what do we say that we can't say, well, the tree, the seed is just gone, it disappears. It's morphed into the entire tree. So we can say the seed is manifesting throughout the whole tree, just as in different form now.
Mm.
So again, if that's not witnessed, it's okay, no big deal. But then what can be witnessed is the natural functionings of the gunas, or the mind. And if that can't be witnessed, then the claiming authorship of the me and how it will happen immediately. There'll start being judgments and evaluations and criticism. I miss the pure consciousness. I miss this opportunity. My mind is so rajasic. I can't. And what's illuminated is like, oh, that's the claiming me. Thank you, Krishna, for showing me the claiming me more clearly. For you to see what's witnessed, the presence, going into the body-mind mechanism is witnessed. And if that's not witnessed, then the sense of personal doership is clearly seen, or the gunas functioning.
A quick question about thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
When enlightenment happens, the thoughts continue to arise.
Yeah, they have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between the orientation to a thought from an enlightened perspective versus a non-enlightened?
So I'd ask you again, what are you going to get out of if you get the answer? Who wants to know this? And what will you get if you get the answer? What are you trying to eliminate or a concept to get rid of by getting an answer?
Well, the question came from this thing about the maze and how following a thought versus tracing it back to the source will just get you stuck in an endless maze of thoughts.
Okay, so now the question is, does the function of this mind going in the maze, does that occur whether there is a sense of personal doership or not? Because that's what's absent in the sage. And we go back to the me, the sense of personal doership does not affect anything. It doesn't do anything. It doesn't have any power over it. So our answer would be yes. The mind would be still distracted, and it would come back, and we go down this way, and we go down that way, because that's the nature of the mind. So the sense of personal doership, whether it's happening to me, doesn't have any influence on whether that would continue or not. So there's periods of time where there's concentration, and there's periods of time when it goes away and comes back, and concentration goes away.
But in that passage, Maharshi, I mean, he makes it sound like, where is it now? If you go the way of your thoughts, you will be carried away by them, and you'll find yourself in an endless maze. So he's making it sound like that happens when there's a sense of personal doership, but it doesn't when there's not a sense of personal doership. But you're saying that that's not the case.
No, he's just saying that if you try to assert some kind of control and go down and see, analyze where it's going, it will continue to happen. But he's not saying anything.
So I'm just reading into that.
Yeah. Which always happens. You can read into stuff. So the thing about self-inquiry is, if you got something out of self-inquiry, you kind of exposed misunderstanding. That's what we want to do. So the fact that misunderstanding was exposed, it's like, that's great. In a lot of, that's why it's very hard to read on your own. I mean, some people can do it, but if I read a book on how to play tennis and just tried to go out and play by myself without any lessons, without any video analysis, I don't know how good I would get. Not that we're trying to get good here, but there would probably be a lot of mistakes. I would develop a lot of mistakes. So then he talks about this. The question said, is it understood intellectually only? Is it not intellect a helpful realization? So we talked about that. So does my realization help others? Maharishi goes, yes, certainly. It is the best help possible. but there are no others to be helped. That's a famous line. There are no others to be helped. For a realized being sees the self just like a goldsmith estimating the gold in various jewels. When you identify yourself with the body, then only the forms and shapes are there. When you transcend your body, the others disappear along with your body consciousness. So, just so what he's saying, this is another concept to kind of help draw out of this. Is there's a famous saying in the Ramayana where Hanuman is the monkey god, you know, Hanuman, and he's a servant of Rama. And Hanuman goes, when I see your body, when I focus on your body, I am your servant. When I focus on your body, mind, and intellect and soul, when I focus on your mind and intellect and soul, I am a part of you. When I focus on the self, I am the self. I see the self. I am the self also. So that's what he's saying here. If you're in body consciousness, you're going to see the world, which is name and form. You're going to perceive the world as name and form. If you're always like, and this is something for you to experiment. If you are in your feelings a lot and emotions, then you're going to focus on other people's emotions. You're going to notice other people's emotions. Like, oh, I'm in a really good mood. That person is a good mood. That person isn't. Oh, that person's down. That person's up. You focus on that. But he's saying that the person who has in touch with their self, they see the self in others. Now, this is where this concept can get kind of tricky, though, because it's not like when the sense of me dissolves, the sense of personal doership dissolves, false sense of authorship dissolves, that it was replaced by a certain seeing, by a certain understanding, by a certain state of consciousness. So there's a knowing that all this is consciousness. And the best way that I can describe it, it's not a conscious knowing. If there's a conscious knowing, then there'd be a walking around of, there's self, there's a self, there's a self, there's a self. And even if it was impersonal, there would be, oh, this is self, this is self. The best way I can describe it is that it's unconscious understanding. And so what concept can we pull from the literature to understand this? And the best one I've come across is when Shankaracharya talks about in the Atma Bodha that this understanding is like the sense of direction. So right now, if I asked you, you know, what direction am I looking at, you wouldn't know. But if I say I'm looking south, then immediately you know that what's behind me. And this would be east and this would be west. Now, do I constantly have to say, this is north, this is north, this is north, this is north? No, it's now that I have that understanding, first of all, I know all directions. And then I don't have to think about it anymore. I consciously don't have to think about it. And it's only when I'm asked, hey, can you point which way is north? It's that way. So it's not like this. The understanding is this sense of personal doership is replaced by this constant understanding of north, north, Sure. But yet, if you were asked, you know, if you got me like into a headlock, and what do you see? What do you see? And you're like, okay, let me go. I see self. Because that's the understanding that this is all consciousness. So, so then the questioner, now another thing about when you're reading some of this stuff, it says, is it so with plants and trees? So when you start learning, one of the I guess the natural outcomes of inquiry is that when you start to do it and it happens that it's falling kind of naturally and you get a deeper and deeper understanding. When you read and you start reading on your own, you can kind of see, oh, wait a minute, that's kind of like a tangential question. And so here he's talking about, does realization help others? And then the next question is it so with plants, trees, and et cetera, et cetera? So to me, that's like somebody was just like, their thoughts are just going all over. And it's not good or bad, but I would just say this is more like at the tamasic or rajasic level. And so, one thing I want to talk about is does it help others? So again, helping happens, but if there's an understanding at this level that the helping happens, but it's not out of an understanding that I am helping another, or I am helping other quote unquote, because that'd be self and other. The helping happens. That makes sense?
Mm-hmm.
So then Maharishi goes, do they exist at all apart from the self? Find it out. You think that you see them. The thought is projected out from yourself. Find out where from it arises. Thoughts will cease to rise, and the self alone will remain. And then he goes, for whom is inside or outside? They can be only so long as they are the subject and object. For whom are these again? They both will resolve into the subject only. See who is the subject. The investigation leads you to pure consciousness beyond the intellect. Normal small self is the mind, little mind. The mind is with limitation, but pure consciousness is beyond limitation and reached by investigation as above without mind. So when there's identification going on as previous line of inquiry, there's self and there's others. So that means there's a imaginary boundary of this is me and this is the rest of the world. And so if that is the case, they say, well, what's the effects of that misunderstanding, of this dualistic understanding? There's self and there's other. There's inside and there's outside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay, then we say, okay, well, what kind of effect does inside outside have? There's thoughts here, inside, and everybody else has thoughts inside, which is outside of me.
Mm-hmm.
So then that creates the illusion that thoughts are inside and the thoughts are conditioned by something that is more gross than thoughts, the body. That for some crazy reason we think that thoughts are housed only here, right? And perhaps we say, well, thoughts are only in the brain here. You know? And so that is a gross misunderstanding. It creates conditioning. It creates a huge sense of separation and a lot of pain. Rather than when that sense of separation dissolves, there is no inside or outside. So thoughts aren't notionally located inside or outside. They simply arise. And you say, okay, well, where do they arise from? It doesn't matter where from, because that makes it location. We're not interested in location anymore. Location is only important to the individual who thinks that they're separate from others. So someone said, well, if it's not located within me, where else is it? Well, he's saying if there is no sense of separation, there's no self and others, so location doesn't matter. So now I don't have to think about where the thoughts arise. I'm relieved of that burden of having to think about where the thoughts arise. And that's that blind of inquiry. That's where it's supposed to take you. For whom do these thoughts arise? Well, wait a minute. There's no location, ultimately, no self and others. So they simply arise. Well, where do they arise from? Well, you're just saying location is a notional misconception. It's not important to know where they arise. Now, what happens, though, we can probably go a little bit further in this inquiry, is what happens, though, is for someone who the sense of personal doership is falling away, you may hear them say that all thoughts come from pure consciousness. But that is from the level of their understanding, because they understand that everything is consciousness. So then that's why sometimes you'll read and say, oh, but I read that this sage says that all thoughts come from consciousness. Well, because they're coming from that understanding, and what they mean is that the thoughts are coming from nowhere and everywhere at the same time. Because where is this pure consciousness? Well, it's everywhere, but at the same time, it's smaller than the smallest atom. So that's just a warning that when you go read, you may find someone say, well, the thoughts are coming from pure consciousness. What is important to understand that they're speaking from their unconscious understanding. That's the best way I could describe it. Unconscious understanding. You say, well, which way is north? Well, that's a notional direction. I'd say, okay, this is north. Just a notional understanding. What's important for the person who still has a sense of personal doership is to know that trying to locate them is first an error and serve any purpose, and it just creates more sense of separation. So the final question I would ask before we leave is, I go, okay, I get that, but when I look at this bottle right here, there's an experience that it is outside of me. What do I do with that? From the sense of a personal doership, it does seem that it's outside of me. So that's where we go back to inquiry and use the concept of it is possible to have the understanding that in stage 3. That pure subjectivity is infused in this object. It's infused in this object. And it's infused in this object. And at least there's an understanding of that. And then when there's an understanding that, oh, what is in this, that pure subjectivity that's manifested in stage 3, when it's withdrawn back, and I focus more not on name and form anymore, but on the awareness that's here, and I see that the awareness in here is the same as the awareness that's looking at it, then we're in stage 2. And that's the mystical experience. So it's not only important to know how creation of the sense of pure subjectivity, is created and manifested, but it's also important to see how the manifestation creates misunderstanding and misconception and illusion.
So, Bala,
Yes.
can I ask a follow-up question to what you
Yes.
did here? Okay, so you just illustrated. So, strictly speaking, there is not more consciousness here than there is in that bottle.
Yes.
That's correct.
Yes. So that thought itself, I would imagine, would be a bit freeing to understand that.
Yeah. And wacky. I mean, it feels totally wacky.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then start seeing it in any being that you. All right. Next week I'll be out of town, but I'll next Saturday I'll be out of town, but I think 2 weeks from today should be on. Okay. Namaste.
Namaste.